It's great to see you, and thanks for joining us. You know, you are a congressman obsessed with logistics and connecting the price. I love the fact
that's
that
a very sexy description.
Yeah, I mean, you're behind the Ocean Shipping Reform Act. How much ocean does South Dakota border?
Yeah, people would often ask why the largest reformed maritime law in a generation came from South Dakota, right? But the reality is that 60% of South Dakota's soybeans are exported overseas, along with a tremendous amount of beef and dairy and corn. And I think it's just a good reminder to all of us, you all know, but some of my constituents didn't, that this is an incredibly interconnected global economy, and everybody needs to care about maritime law.
So tell me about what your constituents are feeling, because I mean, part of what I'm trying to get at is why supply chain is connected to inflation, is connected to supply-demand questions, and how does an economy that is so market-based in its DNA solve these big structural problems without creating other problems?
Well, and I'm a big believer in the free market, but I would tell you that that's actually part of the challenge in building resiliency into these supply chains, right? Smart companies have optimized supply chains for efficiency as opposed to resiliency. Now, you can optimize for resiliency, but when things are good, there is no bottom line in that, right? Nobody really pays you for being optimized to withstand a shock if there isn't a shock. And I think that is one of the benefits of something like the Ocean Shipping Reform Act, Steve. It sent a clear message to the foreign flagged ocean carriers that they needed to pay attention to their American shippers, even if that wasn't at any given day of the year the most highly profitable thing for them to do. There were some basic minimum standards they needed to engage in.
Do you agree with Congresswoman Cathy McMorris Rodgers that
always, anytime?
Well, I think part of the question is, are we getting it wrong where we're basically looking at a silver bullet like the CHIPS Act, but then we're neglecting other dimensions of the ecosystem, whether it's permitting around that, which I thought we were talking about permitting in energy areas, but she was talking about permitting in other dimensions of the economy, like chip factories, and also looking at the broad side of, with what Lisa Blunt Rochester wants to do in terms of looking at supply chain resilience and beginning to rationalize some of our data and information around that. Should Congress be doing more along both lines of what Lisa Blunt Rochester suggested and Cathy McMorris Rodgers?
Of course. I mean, this is a serious problem that would require, to solve it, a comprehensive approach. But that's not really how Congress works. That's really not how any organization works. At some point, incrementalism is what ultimately gets the job done. And I think we want to be attentive to try to eat one piece of this elephant at a time. I think we're all aware that the single biggest barrier to additional investment in this country is workforce.
Right.
And that is, I think the solutions there are relatively straightforward, but politically can be difficult to land.
So what is the problem? What is the way to fix the workforce problem?
Well, first off, before I get to immigration, I would tell you we still have a fair number of Americans on the sidelines. And I think there are a number of things that government has done to make it easier for them to stay on the sidelines. And, and I don't want to disagree with Lisa Blunt Rochester. She's right on so many things. And clearly, we do have a daycare problem in this country. And I think we can do some things to address that. But by and large, it's not women who are falling short. At any given day in this country, there are more women that have jobs than men. And the workforce participation rate among women in this country has gone up almost unabated for 40 years. That is not the case with men. And frankly, I think we need to do more from a workforce, a job requirement or a training requirement policy. If people are going to be on some of our safety net programs, which we need, I think we need to hold them accountable for doing what they can to make sure that they can get out of poverty permanently. You cannot escape poverty without a job as a part of that equation. There's no other recipe. And I think the workforce participation rates in this country in the last 10 years suggest that maybe society writ large doesn't fully embrace that idea.
You voted to avert the rail strike also, like Lisa Blunt Rochester, but you said it was embarrassing that Congress was even involved in this. What did you mean by that?
The side should have worked this out. I don't relish the idea that Congress would inject itself into labor negotiations. That seems not a particularly smart thing to do. Let's take the most dysfunctional deliberative body on the planet and let's involve them. Right? But that being said, you would ask Lisa, did you feel good about that vote? If you would have asked me that question, I would have said, yes, that was absolutely the right vote. There was no reasonable alternative. I hate to criticize my colleagues who voted the other way, but are you kidding me? We're really going to crater the American economy to make some sort of a point, a political point. We're going to crater the American economy because maybe we think this is Joe Biden's problem and he needs to own it. That is utter balderdash. We saw the very real impacts that we felt in this country when toilet paper was in short supply for a little while 2 years ago. We saw the very real impacts in this country's economy when formula was in short supply a year ago and still is in some spaces. This wouldn't be one product in some places in short supply.
Right.
A rail strike for as little as a few days would have been everything everywhere.
You are a co-sponsor of the Formula Shortage Reporting Act of 2022. And frankly, I think this is something probably more than anything else other than toilet paper, where Americans became very, very aware that there was something wrong in the system and they felt real. You began tweeting pictures of your local markets and whatnot of things missing on the shelves, and you did this. So I'm interested, what is the state of play today with that and this act that you co-sponsored? But as you go into the markets now in South Dakota, are you sensing that things are back to normal now? Are things fragile? I mean, what's the sensitivity and fragility of the provision of these, particularly food items, that Americans encounter when they're out there?
So I'm glad you used the word fragility, because there's two ways to look at this. One is the current state of play, and things are largely back to normal there. You may hear about some spot shortages, but they're pretty limited. But we have not addressed the fundamental problem, which is we still have only 3 facilities that are making this product for the entirety of North America. And it doesn't take a very big hitch in your giddy up before you can see very...
I want to get that real quick. A hitch in your
giddy up. That's right, Steve. We really
kind of right up there with acronyms for me.
We need to get you out to real America, Steve. This is and if you have a very big disruption, even short term, you can get serious problems, and that has not been addressed. And again, it's hard to know how to address it. Is it the federal government's job to go create a 4th, baby formula factory competing against the other 3, when maybe what the invisible hand of the market wants is 3? Maybe that's the optimized number for profit. And so I don't have as a free market zealot, I don't have the answer to all these questions. But I would tell you that the fundamental underlying fragility of the system has not been fixed.
This is a picture you tweeted out. You can't all see it here, but the picture of this empty shelf as baby found. You did this on November 3rd. Mm-hmm. So this is what the free market is generating right now, right?
Well, that's not what it's generating today. That's what it generated on November 3rd.
Yeah.
And that is a problem.
Let me ask you another broad thing. It's something that I think we can be, again, this is my own editorial view. We can be reckless when we talk about how easy it is to onshore, what our strategy, the time involved. That right now, when you sort of take a snapshot of where the supply chain is distributed globally and around the world and how it got there, it was chasing regulatory opportunities, it was chasing environmental standards opportunities one way or another, it was chasing labor rates. And so when you kind of look at bringing all that back, as I talked to many producers and manufacturers of transnational firms that want to onshore and bring back capacity, because the thing they don't trust in America is price stability or regulatory stability, and they worry about that. And so are we doing a disservice of hyping these topics in such a way that when we come back 2 years from now, we will have achieved very, very little, because the forces that took us this other direction are very hard to reverse? Does that make sense?
It does make sense, and they are very hard to reverse. That being said, I think the still preliminary data, we're kind of early in the post-pandemic environment, but I think there has been a lot of onshoring if you view North America as the shore. I mean, Mexico has been a tremendous beneficiary of people's discomfort or distrust of China particularly. And as people have looked to other Asian countries, particularly Southeastern Asia, they have found it not quite so easy to just pick up and move from China to Vietnam or someplace. But they have had some success doing that. But they found the regulatory environment in Mexico and the kind of doing business environment in Mexico, as well as the logistical issues related to getting something from Mexico to markets in the United States, a little easier to deal with. You're right, we should not overpromise. We need to understand that the road is rocky and curved ahead of us. But I think it is the right message to send, that we would like to see a lot of that back on this side of the ocean.
And finally, I'm going to go to a question out here is, do you have any counsel for the Biden administration and President Biden's team on how to move more expeditiously than they are on the supply chain crisis?
Yeah, I see a certain cautiousness and a desire to not break too many eggs. And I get it. Politics is a messy business, and I'm sitting in the cheap seats, right? I'm a Republican, and I mean I won by 60 points, okay? And I get it. I'm adorable, really, but.
And you're the only representative from South Dakota, right? You're more popular than the senators. There are 2 senators.
Well, that's not that hard to do right now. But no, and so I get it. He's dealing with a more fractious political environment than I am. But you got to be kidding me. I mean, it takes 5 years to permit the same project in this country that Italy and France do in 2 years. I would suggest to you that Italy and France are not the paragons of regulatory efficiency.
Right.
And when they are lapping us, that should be a source of American embarrassment. And so Mayor Pete, who I have respect for, he will come to the Transportation Committee and he will say the right things. And then when it actually comes to solution sets that we're trying to find where the Venn diagrams overlap.
Right.
The solutions, Steve, are so pedestrian and underwhelming. You just know they're not going to make a real change. I mean, it's time to make people a little nervous with some of these suggestions. And not just, it's easy for Biden to want to irritate the right, but if he really wants to be a change agent, if he really wants to transform the American economy in a way that will pay multi-generational dividends, let's make everybody a little uncomfortable.
Great. Let me go to Jeff Carneal. Oh, right here. Let's go to this gentleman right here.
Hi, good morning, Congressman. Carrie Davis from the American Association of Port Authorities.
Oh,
so our 87.
Are you in South Dakota too?
Well, not in South Dakota, but of course, 90-some-odd% of everything coming in and out of your state is coming through our seaports.
Right.
Thanks for your work on ocean shipping reform.
Right.
With a lot of negotiation, we backed that bill. Those big old containers on that photo behind you, the flow of those things around our country, coming in and out of the country, are going to increase anywhere from 10 to 50% over the next 30 years. Stepping out, how do we plan for increased trade volumes? Where do we make investments? Is it a labor issue solely? Right. How do we make those investments?
Great, thank you.
Well, first off, I would tell you, South Dakota is not a heavily unionized state. And so the last 4 years, I've learned a lot more about unions than I do just growing up in South Dakota. And I would tell you, early on in the port issue, I thought that maybe the unions would be a problem. They absolutely weren't. Every time I met with anybody, they're like, we want to work extra shifts. We want to work Saturdays, right? We just put us to work. We want to get to work. And so although I know they could take a few more people, the ones they've got really are highly skilled and are highly engaged in the work. I did not vote for the bipartisan infrastructure plan, but it wasn't because I was concerned about the spending. A lot of the spending in that bill is going to help make the kind of investments that we need in ports. And I think we could do even more of that because you're right. If America is going to continue to grow, those ports are going to be even busier, and thank goodness for that. But another thing I think we need to do is understand that trucking is one of the weakest links in the supply chain right now. We're 80,000 truck drivers short, and those guys can't work a lot more hours, in part because they're working as many as they are allowed under law to work today. And many of them are very safe drivers. I think they could work an extra hour a day and be perfectly safe.
And you've said the same thing on pilots. You've said that we have got to relax that a bit right now.
I mean, the fact that we make pilots go retire really 10 years before the rest of America retires is inconceivable to me. I mean, you're telling me that a 60-year-old guy or gal can't safely fly a plane? I don't believe it. I don't believe it. And we're not quite where Japan and Europe is, but clearly we're on the bad side of a demographic aging of a country, which means we better be focused about how to make the use of graying America to a far greater degree than we've been comfortable doing. And I don't know if that ties into the ports, but it certainly ties into trucking, and it certainly ties into the air commerce as well.
So I want to thank Representative Dusty Johnson, who is allegedly adorable in South Dakota. And I just want to say thank you so much. And I'm going to say that Semafor is going to continue to do a series of events that look at these structural issues in the U.S. economy. And I hope we can continue this conversation. I'm impressed with the depth of your commitment on it. So I hope you'll be back.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Rusty. Thank you.